Good afternoon. Welcome to the Value of Being Equity-Minded session, our last session of the day. My name is Jennifer McKenzie, and I am the moderator for this session. So before I introduce our presenters, I have a few items to share with you. Please note that we are in a Zoom meeting. And that you have both video and audio microphone capability. We ask that you keep your microphone muted unless you're interacting in some way. Please take your cues from the presenters and from me so that we may create a productive environment for all. Should you have any questions or comments otherwise, please enter them in the chat box. Additionally, you may use the chat feature to share thoughts with the presenters and or with each other. You also have the ability to post reactions like thumbs up on your video, so feel free to use those as appropriate. Thank you for being with us and enjoy the session. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you our presenters from Hartnell Community College, Cheryl O'Donnell, Guy Hanna, and Nina Vazquez.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
So I'll go ahead. I'll be kicking off the presentation with the first few slides, and then we'll each take our corresponding slides as they come. I am Cheryl O'Donnell. I'm the Academic Senate President at Hartnell College. I'm also the Outcomes and Assessment Committee Chair, and I'm a business faculty member. Today, we also have Nina Vazquez, who is our Student Success and Equity Committee Chair, as well as a math faculty. We have Guy Hanna, who is our Outcomes and Assessment Specialist, and in other words, he's my data guru. And he's a member of both committees. And then Kelly Locke will not be presenting with us today, but she is here in spirit, and she's our curriculum committee chair and an academic senate member and a math faculty. So that's our team right now. So this presentation is about sharing with you all a culture of collaboration that's happening on our campus. And part of the description of our presentation you may have read is about being tired of working in silos. And I don't think we work in silos intentionally at times. I think we're all just busy with what we do, what we teach, the committees we serve on, etc. But what happened was, as I became Senate President, and I'm very involved on campus, and I was also the chair of the curriculum committee, and Nina was in the office across from mine in the hallway, and Kelly and I worked at the college for 25 plus years, and she's a math faculty with Nina. And there were all these overlaps that went beyond just what we did in the classroom, and it didn't hurt that we're all friends beyond just being colleagues. So it dawned on me when I became Senate President that this was an opportunity to really leverage the work that we're doing in different standing committees of the Senate. And the fact that we all, play well together and like each other was even just a bonus, and that we could leverage that work and build a synergy and start to integrate the work that we were doing. And as you can see on the slide, multiple initiatives going on our campus. We're addressing the call to action. We have guided pathways going, AB 705, and of course, curriculum and assessment and including equity and examining equity in all of these different initiatives is key. So we started putting our heads together and thinking about how we could do this better and smarter. The overview of the presentation today, we're going to give you a background on the development of our equity rubric on campus and some assessment rubrics that we have been developing over a year-long project. And both of these components have to do with teaching and learning. Of course, the equity rubric speaks more on the teaching side right now, and the learning component goes with our assessment rubrics that you're going to learn more about. We want to share with you the next steps of our timeline and talk about our collaboration with our curriculum committee, our continued development of the equity rubric through faculty participation, creating focus groups on our campus, and just basically trying to get campus-wide engagement in our efforts. The goals of our collaboration is to provide faculty with guidelines for addressing equity in their teaching and learning, to promote faculty engagement with the use of our equity rubric. We want to inform faculty of a new standardized approach that we are using, and this is a shift on our campus for assessing our core competencies, which are our institutional learning outcomes, as well as our GE outcomes, and to better define a framework of how we approve GE courses on our campus, which in turn, those GE courses with their outcomes tie into our institutional outcomes. We definitely want to hear from you. We have a lot of slides, so we'll try to move quickly. And what we're going to ask is if you will type any questions you have into the chat and reference either myself, Nina, as she's presenting, or Guy, then I will be monitoring the chat from this point forward, and we can take questions at the end. So I'm going to turn it over to Nina Vazquez, who again is the chair of our Student Success and Equity Committee, as well as one of our wonderful math instructors. Thank you, Nina.
Thank you, Cheryl. So this is my introduction slide here, and I'm going to talk to you about the equity rubric. I don't expect you to be able to read that slide, so I'm going to throw a link in the chat here to our equity rubric. You can go ahead and click on that, and you'll be able to view the rubric as I talk you through it. So like, you know, as Cheryl mentioned, we're going to be starting with the teaching portion of it. And, you know, we came together because we figured all of these things work together, right? They work together. And so we need to figure out, we need to work together. We need to figure out how to build those bridges across those silos and just be a little bit more fluid. So I'm going to give you the background to how we developed this rubric, and then I'll share with you where we're going with it. Next slide, please, Cheryl. Oh, who's doing this? Thank you. So the background was that when I first became chair of the Equity Committee, Student Success and Equity Committee actually happened to be right when we transitioned from being a basic skills committee into the Student Success and Equity Committee. And so we started just exploring the idea of equity, and we started to develop our own equity statement at the college. I just put another link in the chat because that link, the Center for Urban Education at USC, became one of our biggest references. And from that reference came this slide here that you are looking at. And the next few slides came from that reference that really, I think, helped us visualize equality versus equity. I know there are lots of pictures out there that describe equality versus equity, but this is the one that really resonated with us. So as you can see, this picture shows equality as everything being equal. Next slide, please. And so usually we think of equality as being fair and consistent, right? And but notice how and on this slide, things don't appear to be quite equal, right? The world is not equal. The world is not fair. The world is not consistent. Some people have longer ladders to climb. Some people have a boost, you know, so it's not equal, unfortunately. Go on to the next slide, please. So furthermore, on top of that, sometimes we have these systemic biases and that contribute to observable gaps. So in this picture, the biases, the racism, the microaggression, all is depicted in the broken ladder. So all of these things put together, you know, contribute to that gap that we see, that observable gap. Sometimes it's referred to as an achievement gap. Sometimes it's referred to as a performance gap. But that gap is what we're trying to address. Next slide, please. So the Center for Urban Education asks us to imagine providing extra support and resources to those ladders that need it, to fix those barriers and intentionally support those disproportionately impacted subgroups. Next slide, please. So what is this gap, or what causes this gap, or what can it be? We can only guess, right? The gap is that yellow highlighted piece. That's the difference. The line there represents the typical or performance rate for the state of California. You have all the subgroups that are delineated in each one of those bars, and that yellow represents the gap up to the typical value in the state for those 4 subgroups. So those 4 subgroups are disproportionately impacted groups. And so that gap, as we try to understand it, could be due to missed opportunities, right? Such as texts, funding, tutors, substitute teachers, test prep, etc. Next slide, please. So our committee in the Student Success and Equity Committee wondered how we could answer this call. How can we address this? And so we started by looking at the Peralta College Equity Rubric for online education. I should have written the link down here for you. If you don't mind, Cheryl or Guy, throwing the link in there in case anybody wants to look at the Peralta Equity Rubric. It is on that presentation if you could copy it from there. So we started looking at the Peralta Equity Rubric and we thought, wow, this is great. This is amazing. This is awesome. Let's create something like this. Let's use it as a starting point. Let's adapt it to Hartnell's community, right? And so we started, digging in with it. And then a few months later, we came across this seminar, this workshop that Dr. Luke Wood and Frank Harris presented on employing equity-minded and culturally affirming and teaching, culturally affirming teaching and learning practices. And so thank you, Cheryl. So there's a link for the Peralta rubric. So we thought, well, what if we put the 2 things together? What if we could create our rubric off of the dimensions that Dr. Wood and Dr. Harris were recommending for equity-minded and culturally affirming teaching. Next slide, please. So these are the 5 practices that they recommended in that webinar that we decided to take and form into our rubric. They call the first practice be intrusive. They call the second one be relational. The third one be culturally relevant and affirming. Then be community focused and be race conscious. If you're interested and you haven't seen that webinar, here is the link to that one as well in the chat. Next slide, please. So first, I'd like to say that our rubric is a work in progress. We expect to edit it. And in fact, there has already been some recommendations for changes as of we had our last student success workshop at Hartnell College where all faculty and staff attend, and we got some recommendations already. So it is a work in progress. And that's because we view equity as a mindset, as a journey, as a process. It's not like you can become equity. We're always moving towards being more equitable. So if you're looking at that document, the first link I sent, if you're looking at our equity rubric, you'll notice that page 1 has our equity statement, which, by the way, took over a semester to come up with, meeting, and agreeing on that equity statement in itself as a committee was huge for us, huge. But since then, that statement was sent forth to Faculty Senate. It was approved by the Senate. It is now being shared more college-wide and embraced more college-wide as our equity statement. Page 2 has some framing language that we borrowed from the Center for Urban Education. Page 3 begins with the dimensions. And so dimension 1 is what Dr. Harris and Dr. Wood define as be intrusive. However, that is the one dimension that our faculty have requested that we rename because the word intrusive can have some negative connotations. So they did give us some suggestions. And if you have any suggestions for how to rename our first dimension, please share with us. So let's go ahead and look at the first dimension. I'll go through them pretty quickly. And then we'll move on to the assessment piece. Oh, so the intentions, before I get started with dimension 1, the intention for the rubric was to provide faculty with a tool that supports all of the statewide initiatives that we are currently moving towards. The online education initiative, AB 705, the call to action, the chancellor's vision for student success. And secondly, we wanted to personalize all of these initiatives to align them with our own community, our own vision, and our own mission. Next, please. So now I'm going to give you that brief tour that I mentioned. I'm going to go in order. I'll give you some examples as we go through for each one of those. Yeah, I have to admit I have more examples for some than others because, like I said, it's still a work in progress. We're still working on developing, but feel free to ask questions in the chat and yeah, let us know what you think. Give us suggestions. Slide 1, please. Next slide. Okay, so the first dimension, be intrusive, again, it's the one that we're looking to rename. So as I go through this slide, if you think of a better name, please give us suggestions. Someone in our faculty suggested to call it be proactive because it really is about, as you see in that first blurb there, it's about proactive student engagement so that no student falls through the crack. That's our brief little synopsis of it, right? And then I have an image there, right? Because there are always stories hidden in the language that we choose, right? And the students pick up on that. The students pick up on that language. So what are our elements, some elements and some descriptors of this, of being intrusive as defined by Dr. Wood and Dr. Harris? They define it as, it could be as simple as choice of words, right? Like switching, rebranding office hours to student hours, or as one of my colleagues, he calls them math parties instead of office hours. And so he invites students to his math parties. Some people call them coffee and gossip hour, you know, and so however you want to rebrand them so that it is more inviting. Maybe switching the word mandatory, because we oftentimes communicate with our students in messages and we use it as mandatory. And maybe switching that word to plan to attend or plan to instead of calling it mandatory. It's a little bit, again, so it's about our choice of words because there are hidden stories in those words. For example, instead of using the word requirement in our communications to student, we could use tips for success. So the choice of words is definitely something that we can examine in an entire workshop, but that's one example. Another example here is to be explicit and proactive in our communications and always assume that nothing is obvious. Nothing is obvious. And so if we can provide students with multiple opportunities to figure out what it is that we want, that is being explicit. Not just saying it once, but saying it multiple times in different ways. Oh, thank you. Someone suggested be intentionally engaged. Yeah, like mindfulness, right? So it's about being mindful of that engagement. Thank you, Mrs. Silva. Yes, good suggestion. So that is the first dimension in a nutshell. And on your link, if you're looking at the rubric, you will see that it has a spectrum. It is a rubric. It shows you how you can move along that spectrum. And at the bottom of that page, it shows you some examples. So it starts with incomplete, and then it goes to aligned, and then it goes to exemplary. And these were the descriptors that in the committee we decided to go with, and then we broke out into subgroups. Again, this was work that took us about a year to get to where we are right now. It's been a year, and we're still fine-tuning it. So that's dimension 1. Go on to dimension 2, please. So dimension 2 is called Be Relational. And it is about authentic relationship building. We want to build those authentic relationships and connections to demonstrate to students that we are truly invested in their success. And so that reminds me of a whole workshop we attended in the challenge on humanizing ourselves, right? Humanizing ourselves so that we can build those authentic connections and relationships, such as through a welcome email or a video, or even further weekly videos, right? To make ourselves look accessible and approachable. I had a fabulous teacher in an online course last summer on equity. Her name is Fabiola, and she would take videos from a different room of her house every week. And it was just so cool to be part of her life. So things like that, so that we look ourselves, so that they see us as mentors, instead of that authority figure that they get scared. Yeah, if you are not able to see the rubric, would you like us to put it up on the screen here? I'm hoping you're looking at the rubric. Please, yeah, go ahead and show them, just in case not everyone has access to that link, just so that you can see a quick view of the rubric. So here's dimension 2. I think that's 2. So you can see here again that we have our flow from left to right. We have incomplete alignment, we have aligned, and then we have exemplary. And then at the bottom, you see some examples like the ones that I went over right now, such as the videos. The idea is to remove the isolation in this environment. And even when we go back face to face, right, there's still isolation, and to build relationships. So with friendly salutation videos to humanize ourselves, and by hosting discussions, whether live or in Canvas, but being like equal participants ourselves is one way to do that. Thank you, Cheryl. If we can go back to the next dimension now, the next slide. Dimension 3, be culturally relevant and affirming. So this relates to having our courses represent the culture and the experience of our students, to provide relevance and meaning and context to their lives, right? So how do we do that? That's super challenging, but I have to say it's still a big question mark in my head too. But we do have some ideas that validation is supportive of this dimension. In other words, to remind students that it's normal to feel the way they do, that they're not alone, and that they are in fact capable, and that they do belong. Because believe it or not, or maybe you do, but you probably do believe it, all of those things are not obvious to them. They doubt every single one of those things that we have mentioned. And validation can influence self-efficacy and motivation. Research has shown, I've read the research behind this. So even the images can validate them, can raise them up or pull them down. So the images in our materials, right? The types of assessment that we use can raise them up, pull them down. The types of dialogues, the topics that we choose. So these are all things to be mindful of in dimension 3, so that we can be culturally relevant and affirming. Next slide, please. Dimension 4, to be community focused. This means to be intentionally molding of our roster into a community. so that it's not just a list of names or a list of ID numbers. We want to take that roster and shape it into a community so that we can foster one another's learning to support each other. Again, very challenging, not easily done, especially when we're in this online environment, right? So we need to continue to provide frequent opportunities for building connections, authentic opportunities though. And it's so hard to do that, like creating discussions. We can create discussions all the time, but something that really connects and is meaningful to the different populations, different subgroups in our classes is a big challenge. But we need to provide those frequent opportunities so that they can build connections. And again, we can host live discussions, we can host Canvas discussions, but also we would need to participate ourselves. That needs to be initiated by us so that we model that type of contact. We model that type of discussion and bonding. Thank you. Next slide, please. And the last dimension is be race conscious. And so this is about having intentional opportunities to engage in racial and equity issues so that all students feel they are valued and safe to engage. So the way the presenters discussed this, or I've heard others paraphrase this, is that this is the opposite of colorblind. It is hard. It is uncomfortable, right? I struggle with this one because I have this fear of not being politically correct, right? I'm afraid of offending. And so it is a very challenging dimension. It's about addressing those tough topics and discussions that make us all squirm, you know, systemic racism, microaggressions, bias, imposter syndrome, racial trauma, which some people don't believe exists, you know, racial taxation. So all of those discussions, even in my math course, I have to figure out how to be race conscious. So that's the last dimension. And if you're looking at the rubric, you'll see that, again, it has incomplete, aligned, exemplary with examples. And you'll notice that some of our dimensions are more developed than others, and that's because it is still a work in progress. So again, if you have any recommendation, oh, thank you, I like that. Being color bold, I like that. So I would love to hear any recommendations, love to hear what you do with this. Take this and do what you will with it. But this is how we're approaching the equity in teaching at Hartnell College. And now I guess we're going to move on to assessment piece with Hanna.
Thank you, Nina. Okay, Guy, your turn.
Thank you, Cheryl and Nina. And good afternoon, everyone. I had the pleasure of talking about a project that the Outcome and Assessment Committee has been working on 2 years. So when Nina was talking about the work of the Student Success and Equity Committee taking 1 year, this core competency rubrics project actually was started in spring of 19. So we can go ahead and start, Cheryl. Thank you. So today I plan on covering the background and the steps that the Outcome and Assessment Committee took, our research and process of development for this project, our core competency rubric elements for assessment that we've identified, as well as our engagement and implementation plan and timeline for action steps in the future at Hartnell. So before we get started, I need to talk a little bit about Hartnell's assessment plan. At Hartnell, we use a 4-year assessment cycle. So this involves 3 years of course assessment, or SLO, student learning outcome assessment. And in the 4th year, we look at a focused look just on our program learning outcomes. So the year 1920 at Hartnell was what we termed or called the year of the PLO, when each of our program disciplines really took an in-depth look at their PLOs to make sure that they were still meeting the needs of our students. However, one issue that came up for the Outcome and Assessment Committee was how to better assess our learning outcomes for our general education. Hartnell has defined its general education outcomes and commonly refers to it as our core competency. As part of our charge, the Outcome Assessment Committee is responsible for the assessment of those core competencies. And some institutions may refer to these as their ISLOs, their institutional student learning outcomes. Next slide. So in accordance with our mission, as defined on page 74 of our catalog, all students, when they leave the college and graduate with an associate's degree, should be able to demonstrate the following competencies. And I'll go over them here, and then we'll cover them later. But global engagement, students will demonstrate citizenship via knowledge and of interaction, civic participation, diverse cultures, people, and social justice advocacy. Personal growth, demonstrate ethical decision-making, goal setting, and positive lifestyle choices. And then our remaining four, aesthetic analysis and applications, students will analyze, conceptualize, evaluate, synthesize creative and artistic expression via applied contexts such as cultures and disciplines. Communication, students will effectively communicate to various audience via spoken, written, visual, and other forms of communications. Information competency, students will define information needs, utilizing appropriate technology, using information effectively and efficiently, evaluating critically, and using information ethically. And then finally, inquiry and reason, students will be able to analyze analytically, creatively, and use critical thinking to evaluate ideas, predict outcomes, and form conclusions and solutions. And these may look similar to outcomes that you have at your institution. However, since our general education has no defined program learning outcomes or student or SLOs, and we have a lot of data in our assessment system, which we use Illumin, and our programs have done an amazing job with the direct assessment within the program, but there was no direct assessment for our general education programs. And this was an issue, of course, for our accreditors and some of our Title V programs. And you say, well, what have you used in the past? We used a graduate survey. It was an instrument that we sent to all of our graduating students and just asked them about their knowledge gains in these 6 core competencies areas that we had at the college. However, this presented 2 issues for the committee and the college. Low participation rates. Students that are graduating are really hard to get to engage. And yes, we did offer to pay them, and that still did not net us a higher participation rate. As well as it's an indirect measure because it's formed on student perception of their own learning and not a subject matter expert, i.e. the faculty. So understanding this, the Outcome and Assessment Committee sought a solution to have a better assessment method. So the action steps that the committee took started with a review of other colleges' approaches. I can tell you that some of the colleges on the call, we looked at your sites, as well as looking at other methodologies for core competency assessment and evaluation methods nationally. We reviewed our catalog and all available data of assessment that we had in the area. We worked with our curriculum committee to form a subcommittee to look specifically at assessment for core competency of general education. And we conducted a multiple semester review of all of our courses listed in our catalog as general education, doing an exhaustive review of data from IR, looking at student transcripts, and having a great group of counselors who aligned and checked transcripts and all of our requirements and restrictions and transfer graduation requirements at institutions beyond our borders to make sure that these were alignment with all requirements. Next slide. So we examined 264 general education courses with our 3 different general education patterns that we have on campus. We, like most institutions, probably have a local general education pattern, one that conforms with our CSU, and then of course our GETSI pattern. And we worked hard to logically align these with our 6 core competencies. And I will tell you that this was quite a project. So I'm very grateful to our counseling area for this work. So what we did is we made recommendations to the curriculum committee for future review. And these can of course be adjusted, but this was a starting point that Hartnell College had never had. But however, this was just step 1, forming these alignments of these 264 courses into these 6 core competency group. Next, we needed a framework for assessment, and we needed something to construct this. So looking to really add value to all that we do, the committee chose, next slide, The value rubrics from the AAC&U. The value, or the valid assessment of learning in undergrad education, is a nationwide practice looking at core competencies, critical thinking, analytical skill, citizenship skills, and has been looked at by 2- and 4-year public, private, just a wide range of college to make sure that these are the essential student learning outcomes. So next slide. Since their release in fall of 2009, these rubrics have become widely referenced. These statistics are a little bit old, but as of 2015, 70,000 individuals and almost 6,000 institutions with almost 2,200 colleges using the value rubric format in some form or fashion at their college to help with this evaluation and assessment. These value rubrics include a core set of 16 rubrics that the AAC&U developed. I want to point out that the ones in red are the ones that Hartnell College chose to crosswalk and use to match up with our core values and missions to make sure that we were evaluating and assessing everything possible. So the ones in red, and there are 12 of those that we chose. So we had to work to turn these standardized, if you will, value rubrics into our own, localize them. So I, as the outcome and assessment specialist, previously had worked at the University of South Florida. So I was able to reach out to some of my connections at the University of South Florida, and through their partnership with Long Beach City College, we were able to obtain a rubric that really addressed our aesthetic analysis and application rubric, because this was one area that the standard value rubrics from the AAC&U did not incorporate, but University of South Florida and Long Beach City College developed this aesthetic analysis and application rubric based on the value rubrics framework. So we were able to use that in our evaluation. Our outcome and assessment committee then created 6 teams, one for each of the core competency, and began to define the elements that we would assess by customizing the standard rubrics and how we would measure those values. We also looked at some of our partner institutions that our students transfer to, including Cal State University Monterey Bay, which a lot of our students work with. So for instance, their information competency rubrics, we made sure it was in alignment with ours at our college. This involved a multiple semester of refinement and actually using the rubrics. I have many faculty for doing this extra work on their own and assessing student work. Involved a wide range of faculty from most disciplines on campus. So let's take a look under the hood and see what we've come up with. So the aesthetic analysis and application, again, the definitions at the top, students will analyze and conceptualize and evaluate. The 4 criteria or element of assessment are what the committee, after refining and reviewing our missions, our values, our core values of the institution, felt were the elements that we needed to make sure were in our rubric, independent of the discipline that was assessing this course for general education outcomes. So as you can see, interpreting the aesthetic experience, solving problems, innovative thinking, connecting, synthesizing, and transferring were elements that we felt needed to be assessed no matter what artifact or what assignment that the faculty member was choosing to assess for the core competency. Next slide. So this is an example of what those elements might look like in practice of a rubric. This is an example of that Long Beach City College USF collaboration for the aesthetic analysis and application rubric. So as you can see on the left-hand side, the elements of definition for assessment were defined, as well as the scale of learning, with 4 being, the maximum amount of learning accomplished, and 1 being the minimum amount. So I do want to point out that this is, again, borrowed from USF and Long Beach City College. And while much of our art faculty has been in agreement with the verbiage on this document, that it is still to be negotiated. Just as Nina has said, for the equity rubrics, we are still conducting forums to make sure that we negotiate the exact verbiage for our rubrics. But I just wanted to give you an example of how this might actually play out when you're actually trying to do the assessment. Next slide. So for our communication core competency, we want to make sure that students can communicate in to various audiences, spoken, written, and visual. So we are still working with our speech and communications department to develop our elements there, but our written and language and English department have developed our written elements for communication, including context of purpose for writing, content development, genre and discipline conventions, sources and evidence, documentation of sources, control of syntax and mechanics. So as you can see, very in-depth and thorough for our written communication area. So global engagement, students will demonstrate global citizenship. So our criteria are elements of assessment here, or knowledge of cultural awareness and worldview frameworks, the skills that they might need for this area. Attitudes, we define that as curiosity and openness to new ideas. And then their actions and advocacies in the area. So we worked with many disciplines to make sure that all things were incorporated, to make sure that we had the diversity for culture and social justice advocacy avenues for this assessment element. Next. Information competency. So as I mentioned, we worked with one of our partner institutions to make sure that we were assessing the right elements, to make sure that our students were prepared for success beyond our borders. So elements of assessment defines information needs, identifies the scope and level of information needed, selects and evaluates sources, applies information to accomplish a specific purpose, and assesses and uses information ethically and legally. And then finally, our inquiry and reason core competency. Students will use analytical, creative, and creative thinking to evaluate ideas. So our elements of assessment, they need to be able to define an issue or problem, present existing knowledge or research and or their views, present a proposed argument, solution, methodology, hypothesis, or perspective, and then be able to conduct some type of analysis or evaluation, and then form some type of conclusion. And then personal growth, students will demonstrate ethical decision-making. So our elements of assessment, ethical self-awareness, ethical issue recognition, independent learning, and personal wellness. So this is something that we worked very, very hard with multiple departments to make sure that we got all of the elements of assessment that were needed from our various general education partners. And then our next steps. So as you can see, we've worked for several years to define the elements, but as far as getting the actual language of the assessment rubrics for students even met the learning objective or not, we are conducting forums this semester, one for each of the rubrics that you've seen today with our faculty. We've given them notice and access as you have. We are using an internal Google Drive to make sure that they can comment before the meetings, but we're really making sure that we really negotiate and get that hammered out this term, because in the fall, our collaboration with the curriculum committee will be at its next stage. So as Cheryl has pointed out earlier, I have the pleasure of getting to work with and serve not only the Outcome and Assessment Committee, but the Student Success and Equity Committee, as well as the Curriculum Committee. And Dr. Locke was unable to be with us today, but the next steps will involve the Curriculum Committee embarking on their own rubrics. And unfortunately, I do not have that to share, but if you will, the elements for our course of record and our course outlines will thank you, Cheryl. After our rubrics and feedback for finalization, we'll work with the curriculum committee for implementation of these courses. And as part of that, in the curriculum committee, there will be a review sheet or a kind of a checklist or a rubrics to make sure that every course has had the equity rubrics for it to be reviewed for the equity rubric. And if it is a gen ed course, it will also make sure that it's aligned with one of our 6 areas, and that the new elements for assessment are now included in our new assessment calendar and our assessment practices moving forward. So our first courses will be approved using this new assessment method starting this fall, the fall of 21, with our first courses actually using this new assessment method next spring. So Understanding that curriculum and review takes years for all of our courses to cycle through the process. It's working with the curriculum chair. It's going to take about 4 years for all of our general educations to have their natural review cycle. And the idea is that as they come through for their natural review, they will have the process to make sure that the equity rubrics has been applied to their course, as well as, again, at their general education course, that these new assessment elements will be taken into place. And I think that that covers our timeline for our next steps and our implementation process. I think that's it. Let's check the next slide, Cheryl. I think that's it. Yes, okay, that's it. All right. So hopefully I covered it all.
Yes, thank you,
Yes.
Guy. So that's it for our presentation. If you have any questions, we're happy to answer them. As Guy and Nina pointed out, between our committees, we have 1 to 2 years of vested time and meetings and collaboration going into these rubrics, and the curriculum rubric is the next one to come that we will be working with and collaborating and looking as to how we can get all these tools for our faculty to work together for the good of our students, for our teaching and our learning processes. Let me check the chat real quick. Okay, there is Jennifer, who's our facilitator, put a link in for a survey for the session. So if you could take that, it'd be much appreciated. And if there are no questions, maybe we can get out a few minutes early, although I'm going to let Jennifer weigh in on that because I'm not in charge of the session, just a presenter here.
I see a question.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so how do you get faculty to buy in? Thank you, Sylvie. That's a great question. And that is something that we're working on. We're going to have the faculty forums coming up, and overlap. I think a big piece on our campus is, I don't know, we're not a really small school, but we're not a huge college either. And our faculty know each other very well. And we have key leadership in these committees with Nina, myself, Kelly Locke, other people. And so we kind of are always, sharing this information, rolling them out in conversations in the hallway in different ways. And the next important step, though, is, but I think we address this a lot. I do anyway, when I present to the faculty as the Senate president or the outcomes and assessment chair, that we aren't content experts. We need them. We need the other faculty to make this work. And we try to keep the focus on our students, ultimately to give them the learning experience that they deserve. So we'll see. Maybe we'll be back next year we talked about that with Jarek when we were putting this together. We said we don't have data yet. We haven't finalized this project, but he wanted us to present anyway with what we have done with the value rubrics and the equity rubrics. All these rubrics, by the way, coming from other institutions. And we hope to return down the road with some data to see how it is working and how the implementation is going, and what kind of buy-in we are going to get from our faculty.
I would add that the buy-in happens gradually too. And so we start small, right, with the small group of core people who we invite them in. And so we put out this rubric back in May, just in time for the summer. And just a handful of people went like, oh, this is interesting. And then in the fall, we presented it like this, just the way you heard me present it today. I presented it to the faculty as well. And explaining that, hey, this is a work in progress and we need you. And so we're going to have those forums. So that's another way, I think, to get faculty buy-in, because they're going to help us mold it and shape it and personalize it. So yeah, Mary Ann, you have a question?
Yes, and maybe I just missed it, but I'm missing in my mind the piece about, I don't know, the logistics, I guess, of using the rubric, like who is applying the rubric? Is that peer-to-peer within the discipline? And then where is that data housed? And I also, like, I can hear in my head the union folks saying, how does that overlap with evaluation? And so I'm just kind of trying to figure all that out. Could you give me some insights on that?
Yes, I'm assuming you're referring for the piece that I presented.
Yes, the
Yeah, okay.
equity rubric.
The equity rubric for teaching, yes, for student success. So it's a personal rubric for faculty. It's not for evaluation purposes. It's not for administration. It's ours. It's faculty's. We're using it, and that's why it's not mandatory. It's look, here's how we have all these initiatives that we're trying to fulfill. Here's something that we thought might help support you as you move towards those initiatives. So each individual is looking at the rubric on their own and then reaching out to us. We have a community of practice that we're going to roll out again, but we've had it before. We had it last semester, no, in the spring. Gosh, Guy, when was the last time we had that community of practice? I think we had
last spring.
Yeah, last spring. And I think we might have had one meeting in the fall, but because of the virtual, and anyway, so we have a community of practice where we come and we share best practices. That's how some of those examples made it onto the rubric. So it's not mandatory. It's just us presenting it as, here's a tool.
So I realized that I thought that you were collecting data on it. So I wondered how you were collecting data.
No, the data comes from the what
assessment rubrics.
The assessment.
Okay.
Yeah, from the assessment rubrics that are not, those are not developed yet. So my piece was on the teaching.
Those are in the works, Marianne, and we enter our data into Illumin when faculty do their assessments, and then you can map within Illumin so that we can take these GE courses that have been identified that align with our core competencies, have the instructors use the rubrics that will be standardized across the board so they're all looking through the same lens at a bigger picture level. And then we will be able to disaggregate and pull the data out for those courses that are all grouped into a particular competency. And we will share that data with the faculty when we have our big, flex day and convocation sessions. We did that last year with program outcomes, and we aggregated, actually not just, we aggregated all of the course level SLOs that were mapped to a particular program outcome. And it's kind of cool because it's a database, but all the different data were pulled together for an overall, report that we could give to each discipline, each program, say, here's how your students are hitting on this core competence, or excuse me, this program outcome within your program. So
are you disaggregating or able to disaggregate that data by race?
That's so just that.
It will.
Go ahead, Guy. Why don't you speak to that?
I was going to say, for the last 2 years, I've been working with the Outcome and Assessment Committee on the value of measuring extra demographic information so we can have those disaggregated data conversations in the future. And I'm proud to say that in the fall, the Outcome and Assessment Committee, in consultation with the Academic Senate, was able to approve, I think, 13 new elements that we will be pulling down in our data load every time. So in a year from now, as Cheryl has stated, we'll be able to have those deep dives and conversations. So not yet, but we have laid the groundworks to make sure that the data will be available and discussable, in that format moving forward.
And now we're working with IT and Illumin folks to make sure that the elements that we want to pull from our colleague database can be pulled into Illumin and used on their side with their software platform. So conversations are happening.
It's exciting. I look forward to hearing about how it goes.
Thank you. I hope we'll have some good news to bring back in a year.
So
Let's
at this time, I'd like to thank our presenters, Cheryl, Guy, and Nina from Hartnell College. We really appreciate you being here. We invite you to join us for the next steps panel discussion next at 2:45. We encourage you to log in up to 5 minutes early to be safe. Please be sure to complete our session evaluation for breakout 3. And I want to thank everyone for attending this session and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. And
Thank
thank you,
you.
Jennifer. And thank you, Susie, for hosting and making this whole symposium happen.
Thank you
Yes, thank
Thank you
guys.
guys very much.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.